Okay, we are good.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pro Physique Code. Today, we're talking about peaking, the magical time when everything comes together and you walk on stage looking perfect. We got a bunch of people here. So we got Mr. New IFBB Pro himself. Evan, how are you, buddy?
Good, man. How are you? Long time no see. I miss you, man.
I mean, you only live like 5 minutes away, so
It's like 10.
you got cool new friends. It's okay. And then we got Miss Dani all the way out in Tulsa.
Hey.
She's had the pleasure of multiple different coaches, so we'll get your input, Dani, on the different peaking strategies you've employed and what's worked and hasn't worked. And then Lexie actually worked with me last year, but before that, were you self-coached, Lexie?
No, I was not.
Okay, so we'll talk maybe a little bit about that, but I think I probably have the most experience with this because I've been coaching the longest and seen just about every type of peaking protocol strategy. And I don't even want to talk negatively too much about things. I just want to talk about why people do certain things and why they may do them a certain way. And then we'll talk about the strategy that's worked the best for all of us. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to Lexie because I want to know what Lexie's first thought was when you did your first show. I think it was the Europa.
Yeah, that was my first show, and it was a weird peak week because I don't know, I was in a college dorm room, so the first weird thing about it all was like trying to figure out where to take my progress pictures in the morning. And I vividly remember because like I had one of those dorm rooms where it was just like a room with 3 beds in it, and then we had a shared bathroom. And the bathroom lighting was like awful, no windows, obviously. And it was just awful. So I remember going downstairs to our community, like the community bathroom for our building, and that's where I took my progress pictures every morning. So that was interesting. But you know, I feel like those weeks were a blur. They weren't awful, but definitely didn't do things as precisely as, we do them over here and like you and I did last year.
Well, explain it to me a little bit. So it sounds like in your first peak week, you had to take daily pictures for your coach.
Yes, so I did do daily check-ins, which is something that you and I did last year, and then I know all of us do with our clients. So I did do daily pictures because that was something new for me. I was used to just doing the weekly pictures. So I'd lug, my stuff downstairs every morning and find that one little bathroom on the first floor that had decent lighting, and that's where I took my pictures. And I think the biggest thing, if I remember correctly, was my first prep that I ever did was truly the first time I had ever like dieted in my life. So I feel like my body responded pretty, like I had kind of, those unicorn diet vibes when, you diet for the first time ever. Your body responds pretty quickly. And I remember the biggest thing for me during peak week was just filling out enough and not looking so like grainy and hard. That was a problem. If I look back at my old pictures from peak week, because I could still find them. I just feel like that was my issue. I almost kind of looked a little grainy in some of them.
Hold on real quick, Lexie. You said something that struck me. You said dieting your first time was the easiest it was ever to get lean?
Yeah, so I feel like for me, I mean, don't get me wrong, my first prep was hard in, its own ways, but I feel like last year I struggled a lot more with hunger and with just feeling run down and tired. Because I feel like anytime sometimes you diet for the first time, it's a little like your body just responds a little bit faster because you don't have that extensive diet.
I don't think she means like prep for the first, like just prep for the first time, but like literally the first time in your life. Like you've never done a diet before ever.
But her body responded well the first time?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
it responded.
I see that.
I felt like, I mean, like I said, the prep was hard in its own way from the standpoint of like living in a dorm room and, still learning like what the sport was. I probably wasn't ready to compete, but but I felt like my body did respond a lot quicker, than it did, or a lot easier than it did this time around.
I mean, just to go off of that, I would agree. The first time I ever dieted was the first time I did a show at 32. And it was the first time I ever tracked my calories closely. And I kind of agree with that, Evan. Like the weight just fell off me the first time I actually paid attention to what was going in my mouth. And like, I was like, oh, there's a lot of calories in this food that I thought was just kind of air quotes healthy. So, sometimes the first time you're just being accountable, it changes things. when you don't just eat because you're hungry. So,
Absolutely.
That's the same for me.
I mean, it sounds like you had a pretty good experience, Lexie. I mean, first peak weeks, I've heard some horror stories.
Actually, you know what? Now I do remember one thing. The only thing that was kind of a little off is I was prescribed a diuretic, and I remember, like, I watched your videos back in the day. Like, I watched them during that time, Paul, and I knew of you. And the term diuretic kind of scared me, and I wasn't so sure. And like, my coach at the time had told me to take one, so I remember going into like GNC or somewhere getting the diuretic that was prescribed, and then I like chickened out, and I was too afraid to take it, and then I returned it because I mean it was like $30 or whatnot. But I do remember I was prescribed a diuretic, but I was supposed to take it, but I kind of chickened out and did it because I had always just like heard diuretic, those can be kind of hit or miss.
Yeah, that's something that it definitely still persists in the sport of bodybuilding, and I think there's probably some applications where they do make sense, but on the whole, they're really misunderstood. So let's talk a little bit about Evan's prep, because I think, understanding the men's physique division, the conditioning, the fullness that needs to come in, along with I'm going to use the word dry, but the word dry, I think, often gets associated with dehydration, and it's not necessarily the case. Because you've been through a lot of preps, Evan, right? Since 2017?
Yeah, 2017. Yeah, 2017, 2016 was my first prep. I was trying to count. I think I've done 17 or 18 shows in that time frame, which is a lot of shows, I think, in that time frame with it. I've had many preps. I've had the vast majority of them have gone well. The vast majority of peaks have gone well. There's been a couple that have gone bad. And for me, it's mainly been due to not handling stress very well.
Sure.
That's the main reason that I feel like I didn't come in where I needed to come in. My biggest struggle is never getting in shape. I can get in shape. That's fine. I'm kind of over the top when it comes to my food choices, and I'm really on the ball with all that. And I feel like eliminating as many variables as possible going into these last 6 weeks is really good. That way, when you go into peak week, you know exactly what it is that you're dealing with. But my issue is getting that balance of filling out and being lean. Because for me, in my body, I have to be incredibly lean to have the lines I need to have for men's physique. But then I need to be full to match up with some of the shorter guys who are, they don't have the
Bubblier.
real estate to fill out. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, because I think you probably have a different first experience. So let's talk about like either your first or perhaps your most kind of odd peaking experience, because I think we've talked about it briefly.
Yeah, my first experience peaking was I'd worked with a coach, still one of my friends to this day. And he was very, very old school in how he did stuff. Back then, I don't know how he is now, but it was the whole water loading thing. It had to be distilled water. And it was no carbs for like 4 days. And then I was already incredibly depleted at that point. But we went no carbs for 4 days and then ramped them up. For my first show, I looked incredibly good, depending on the time frame that I had to go in. But we cut water. We did all that stuff. And it was very, very hard, though. Like, I felt incredibly run down. It was not a fun experience, to say the least.
Sodium?
Sodium was one of the things that, and that was where some issues kind of happened, is he told me to pull sodium initially, but that was supposed to just be the first 2 weeks, but he didn't tell me this is of the prep, so I had no sodium all prep.
Oh, I was talking
The
about
entire
peak
prep.
week.
And then we added it back in a little bit the day before the show. It's when he mentioned
How
it
did
again.
you survive? How did you not die?
It was, I would get a little bit of sodium from like some sauces I would put on, but there was no salt. There was no anything with that. But yeah, we tried. There was some preps after that. We did do a little bit of sodium manipulation. I've never done a lot. The most I've really done is like the day before the show, or I'm sorry, 2 days before the show, reducing it or cutting it out, and then adding it back in the day before the show. Typically that's kind of how we would do it a little bit. And it worked fine. I feel like there was no like real benefit to it, other than just making me more tired and more hungry and
More stressed.
Yeah.
So Danny, just so you're aware, and maybe you don't know this, but a lot of the plans that I've seen from the bigger teams, they tell them to remove sodium.
Yeah, a lot of it.
No salting your foods, no seasonings. And actually, what's interesting about that is that if you remove sodium from your diet, it actually can make digestion worse. You can actually make insulin sensitivity an issue because of low sodium dieting. So a lot of these people that have issues because of prepping, it's because of that. So there's really no reason to restrict sodium. In fact, increasing sodium, especially in a pre-workout meal or in a pre-workout, that those can be wonderful. Core just came out with a new supplement called Hydrate that's specifically around this, so that your performance in the gym is good. So yeah, I always, you always hear
How much
stories
sodium
about
is
girls
one of
kind of
those
passing
supplements?
out, and when you cut sodium, you're lowering your blood volume. You're really putting yourself at risk for some potential, not even just peak week looking bad issues, but like potential health issues. So, um, I had to
How much
learn.
uh
Go ahead.
how much sodium is in one of those hydrate packets? Do you know roughly?
They're downstairs. I'll have to look. I want to say 750
Nice.
milligrams, but it's not just sodium. Doug formulated it specifically for gym hydration, so it's
So
it's
it
other
depends. Yeah.
electrolytes, magnesium, stuff like that, specifically for your workout.
Is
So
it similar to those element packets?
I wouldn't know. I'm
Okay.
pretty out of the loop with supplements. Doug just does such a good job with keeping up with things. So if
Yeah.
I hear, like, say a client's like, "Oh, I'm taking this," and I start to hear that over and over, and then I go, "Oh, well, what is it?" Then I'll look it up. But um, you know, like, don't laugh, but a few years ago, when a lot of the research was coming out on the benefits of higher sodium, like me and Ryan Conley were taking like bouillon cubes before we trained. like, so bumping up sodium is a great way to feel better.
Yeah.
Um, but I
I'm a
think,
big fan of high sodium.
yeah, and the word dry gets used a lot in bodybuilding. And so I think there's a correlation with people go, oh, dry. So I want to get the water out of my body. Um, And there is a temporary period where if you pull water out of your body, you look a little better, but then it gets worse. And
Hmm.
so trying to time that for stage, it's very difficult because backstage, no one gives a shit if you need to work out, if you need to sit in a sauna, if you can't do that, you got a tan on. So, but if you get shredded, it's very hard to look bad, even if you're filling out.
Yes.
And I think we'll get to that. But let's talk about your peak week experience, Danny, pre Pro Physique, and maybe even Lauren. I don't know if you did a show before her.
Yeah, so my first one was in 2012, and Kyle actually did my diet, my husband. When it came to peak week, he didn't have knowledge on how to do my peak week with bikini. He was competing as well, and so we just decided to not overthink it and just keep everything consistent. I'm pretty sure I just was like kept at my low day macros, which was like 70 carbs or something, and probably like 35 fat. I think I just kept those all week long. I didn't worry too much about sodium. I just ate the exact same thing every day, and that's really all that we did. But that was literally a decade ago. At that point, my goal wasn't to win. I was just wanting to do the show. I think I got like sixth or something out of probably 12. And then I had a season with William Grazione. I
Mm-hmm.
forgot about that one in 2014. I can't remember exactly what we did. I want to say we front loaded, like we did
Of
a couple of
course.
refeeds
I'll
at the
tell you
beginning
what you
of the
did.
week.
Me and William were very close at that time, so I'll tell you what you did.
Yeah, that was, you guys were all running around together around that time, but it was, I want to say we front loaded, and then I did like my lower macros throughout the week. I can't remember what we did with sodium. I know it was involved, but I can't remember. But I know that on show day I was definitely flat. We talked about it. I had a pancake on show day. I remember that. Um,
Yeah, unfortunately, show day food still has to digest. So depending on how close you are to stage, and I think this is where, even to this day, some of my clients will be like, "Hey, coach, these girls backstage are eating candy," and I'm like, "That's
Hmm.
great. They didn't have 320 grams of carbs yesterday. They probably didn't eat carbs yesterday, and that's the first, So yeah, they're getting blood in they're getting sugar in their bloodstream, but they're not getting it to their muscle cells for hours. So the digestive system has to be considered when you're talking about peaking. You don't put something in your mouth and it's magically in your muscles, right? And so this is something I had to learn over the years. So let's talk a little bit about. I'm going to give my history, and you guys jump in if you hear something that sounds familiar. So when I first got into the sport, everybody was doing the same peak week, right? It was up your water to like 3 gallons at the beginning of the week, pull out sodium, pull out carbs, And then by Thursday, you bring your water down. You're probably doing depletion style workouts in the gym, lots of high reps. You're really getting all the glycogen out of the muscle. So you're probably looking absolutely terrible by like Thursday, Friday. And then Friday, you cut your water down to like a half gallon. And then show day, it's just sips. But you start kind of eating a bunch of junk food, maybe the night before, maybe the morning of, but you still don't drink a lot of water on show day. And you just hear horror stories of people backstage that could not get a pump, right? And people don't realize when you cut water that drastically, your body produces a hormone that makes you hold on to the water because your body's like, yo, we're about to be dehydrated. So has anybody seen experiences like that with clients or themselves?
Oh yeah.
I
Not necessarily with the junk food part, but the heavy backloading with the heavy depletion and the water cut and all that. And I was told the thought behind it is it's impossible to spill if you do cut water, not completely,
right,
but most of the way out, it's almost impossible to spill. That was the reasoning I was told behind that, especially if diuretics are involved and everything else with it.
Oh, I forgot to mention you add the diuretic Thursday and Friday. So you're yeah. And yeah, I get the thinking, and that's why, and then when I think about the history of the sport that I don't really understand is bodybuilders from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that were taking performance enhancing drugs and things and hormones that would cause you to retain extra fluids. So they were probably combating that. And I'll probably screw all that up. So I'm not saying that there is not a point where some people need to be paying attention to their fluid intake, but I was introduced to Peak Week through Lane Norton. Lane Norton was introduced to Peak Week through Dr. Joe Klemczewski. Dr. Joe, he told me he coined the term Peak Week. So I don't no reason to not believe him. He's, for people that aren't familiar with Dr. Joe, he basically has created a lot of the terms that we use. He created flexible dieting. He created Peak Week. But Dr. Joe's explanation to me when we first started, becoming friends, was that you think of the muscle as a balloon. And when you pull water, you pull sodium, you pull carbs, you're basically deflating that balloon down to nothing. And then you're trying to refill it out in a certain amount of time. And, one of the big problems there is the digestive system. You have to allow the body to process and digest the food. So those really rapid morning of loads, unless you're getting on stage late in the day, that food's still going to be digesting. Mm-hmm. You know what else helps digestion? Water. So when you pull the water, now your body is just holding on to it. And, I'll never forget being backstage at my first show, and on my Peak Week plan, Lane literally wrote, "Eat a Publix sub."
Oh, so I've heard you talk about that before.
Yeah, I'm literally eating a Publix sub backstage at 9 a.m. And I had my, shaker, and he was like, and drink 2 shakers of water with your sub. So I drank people were looking at me like I had 2 heads. It was an NPC show. It was 2007. And it was just the thing that no one did. And I'm a 6'2" skinny bodybuilder, and I won bodybuilding. I won my bodybuilding overall, the novice division. And believe me, those guys were a lot more muscular than me, but they were all backstage like, I can't get a pump. And, I was like feeling pretty good. And Lane did a strategy called front loading, which you alluded to earlier.
I've done front loading.
Where
I've tried it.
Yeah, where we did Saturday, Sunday were pretty heavy depletion days, like low carbs. I think he had me doing HIIT cardio in the morning and steady state at night. So, Monday morning I was run down, but he had me do 500 carbs on Monday and then taper down. It's 500, 400, 300. And then by Friday, I think he brought them back up a little bit, but not to the number they were on Monday. So I was pretty full. He kept my training pretty normal. It was a much better look than what I think the depletion, the diuretics. And I saw a lot of the guys that did the show with me on Monday in the gym, and they all looked amazing. And they're like, man, and they all said to me, oh, I didn't eat enough carbs. And I'm like, no, you didn't have enough water and sodium. You went out after prejudging, and they all came back to finals looking better because they all went out and had lunch like a normal person. So that was my first experience. Thank goodness I hired Lane, because if I'd have got on stage at 6'3", 197 pounds, depleted, I wouldn't have stood a chance. I had really good separation in my legs. That's what I remember. My quads were really deep separated. and everyone else looked smooth. They were just,
Yeah.
they're all backstage and they're like, I can't get a pump. Like I looked so good a couple days ago and I can't get a pump. And I didn't fully understand it at the time. It's taken me a few years, but now it's just become very evident to me that peak week, I almost wish that term didn't exist, because people assume there's going to be some craziness. And sometimes I send people a peak week plan, and it's very underwhelming. It's very minimal. It's like a slight shift in one direction and then a shift in the other. I like to just try to control carbohydrates, because I feel like if you can get carbohydrates going up, and this is something Dr. Joe said to me, he said water follows solutes. So water follows carbohydrates. So wherever the carbs are in your body, that's where the water goes. So ever since he said that to me, it just makes me think, like, as long as I'm eating carbs, they're digesting, they're processing, they're going to my muscle, they're going to pull the water in there, because glycogen holds water with it and it's stored in the muscle.
Paul, here's a good example of exactly what you said right there. Is most people in here probably had like intra-workout carbs before, where you have like, essential amino acids and you have your carb supplement in there. You don't do that in like a little shot. You fill up like a shaker bottle and you put it on there, you drink it throughout the workout, and you look night and day difference when you do it or when you don't do it. And it's the carbs and the water combined together with the training is what pushes it to the muscle and gets it there and fills you up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's if you try to do the intra carbs with just a tiny little bit of water and didn't have any water, it's not going to do anything to you. It's just going to sit in your gut.
Yeah.
Make you feel terrible. And a little bit what you're saying too, Paul, about the people that really, really cut water. Sometimes it works, and you find that lightning in a bottle, and you look crazy. I think one example of this is like whoever watched Arnold this year and saw Justin Rodriguez, open bodybuilder, when he walked out in prejudging, he looked like he was going to win the whole show on Friday night. I don't know what they did, but they did some stuff with some diuretics and some food and probably some insulin. And then the next day he came out and he looked like a spilled mess and dropped from second place to I think 7th or 8th place with that.
Right.
So sometimes you can catch that lightning in a bottle, but a lot of times when you try to do all that, like if you see people on stage who've competed a lot and do a lot of these really drastic measures, their bodies look tired and toxic. Like they look almost like they've been in the tanning bed too long kind of look. Just they don't look healthy. They don't look clean. They don't look fresh with it. And that's not what you want. Like,
especially in the bikini division, because the glute muscles are basically half the show, right? You face the back. And if you pulled water, you are going to have flat glutes, and they want big round glutes in the bikini division. So, anytime I see a girl backstage that is not my client, that's my first thought is like, okay, did she peak properly? Because they can be shredded, they can be gorgeous, they can have great shape, but if they turn to the back and there's just no pop, there's gonna be a problem. And that's part of the sport. Is actually, it doesn't matter what you look like on Instagram. The judges don't know who you are. They are literally standing you side by side. And I think that's one of the reasons I have a competitive advantage coaching. I've had a lot of success because my girls are getting on stage full. This year we actually had one of our coaches had a men's physique turn pro, a classic physique. So, and Matt is actually coached by me, and he peaked him using the linear load, which we can talk about in a little bit, because it's just another version of loading into the show. But I really want to go down this rabbit hole of the experiences of you guys have had with some clients that have come to you from other coaches, perhaps. If you have any examples.
Of like nightmare peaks that they did?
Yeah, just, experiences that you've had with clients, perhaps, because that's a lot of the ways I learn about coaching, right? Because I came through a very specific lens into the sport. And so I would say, well, okay, I'll get someone to reach out to me and I'll look at their update pictures and I'll be like, wow, you look amazing. And then they'll send me their pictures from like nationals and I'll be like, what the hell happened? And I'll say, can you send me your peak week plan? And every 100 times out of 100, it's usually one of these large teams that sends the same peak week plan to everybody, right? And it's inevitably the carbs are gone, the sodium's gone, the water is being depleted. I've even had some horror stories of clients tell me, well, my last peak week, I passed out on Thursday, just, sitting in car line waiting for my kid. I'm like, what? Or, girls passing out, getting the spray tan and stuff like that. Because they're so depleted, like you said, Evan, they feel terrible. So, I'm sure you guys have had those experiences as well with athletes.
Well, I'd experienced myself with that this year, and this is nobody's fault. This is nothing. Really good friend was helping me with a peak, because that's where I typically feel like I've missed, is where I just don't fill out enough. And my coach at the time was having a baby, and it was his first kid, so he was taking care of that, as he should. I had a friend helping me, and my carbs were way too low for me, and it's not his fault. He kind of jumped in last second to help. It's not anything on him. But my body, I have real bad insulin sensitivity problems. So my insulin will drop through the floor if I don't have a very high amount of carbs. Like if I'm really lean, if I drop under 300 grams of carbs a day, my insulin levels will just crap out. I will go hypo 3 or 4 times a day. And if anyone that's gone hypo knows, it's a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
And then if you do it 3 or 4 times a day, it just compounds on top of it to where you feel like you're drooling talking. It's so bad. I mean, I couldn't drive. I couldn't do anything. So yeah, that was more trying to fix everything at the last second with it, and trying to pull a bunch of variables and do a bunch of stuff. And that's the last thing that you want to do. And I remember telling him, I was like, man, I just don't think this is going to work. I don't think this is going to work. Like, this isn't how my body works, but I wanted to trust him. I wanted to do it. And granted, no, it did not turn out well at all. And typically the way I've mostly done my peaks where it's been successful is it's almost a normal week.
Yep.
You just kind of load it up a little bit.
I like to send a questionnaire now just to make sure I understand the food choices and all those things going into the show, because while there does need to be structure during peak week, but it doesn't need to be a huge shift from what you're normally doing. Because by the end of prep, we're all basically robots. We're all eating the same foods that we know we digest. We get up at the same time. We go to bed at the same time. We're in such a good routine. You just want to keep that going into the show. You just want to put yourself in a position where you can be a few percent better. Like, you can look the best you can look, but you don't want to completely throw a bunch of variables at the wall that change everything. And most of that just comes down to being conditioned. Body fat being gone, even if you're slightly full or slightly flat, you're going to look way better than anyone else if you're shredded.
Yep. If you're in shape, you don't have a ton to worry about until you start introducing all of these variables. I talked to Sadiq about this, about like his New York Pro and his Pittsburgh Pro, and he was talking about what I was doing for Tampa, and we were talking about diuretic usage, and he was like, I never mess with it, man, ever. He was like, why risk a whole entire prep for 2% better?
Right.
He's like, because that's probably maybe 5% better.
Right.
But it could go wrong. If it goes wrong, then it's not going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, and you don't. The show day is a very kind of fluid situation. They'll say, hey, you're going to be on stage at 1, and then they'll be like, oh, by the way, we're moving. You're not getting on stage till 4 now because the power went out, or because COVID, or because whatever the reason being. And now you're like, oh crap, do I add another meal? And then that stress can start to kick in. So an athlete that's just in a good, happy place on show day, it's not a big deal if the show moves. If they move you up earlier, if they move you up later. And then, when you should really start to pay attention to these big details is the higher you move up in the sport, right? The pro level, that's when you need to know, okay, that's when I will definitely make my girls, even the girls at nationals, we will run a peak week test down to the hour we're supposed to be on stage and go, okay, let's take some pictures. And if we run a test and we know we're just running it back the next week, exactly same foods, same timing, same training, same cardio, it just takes that stress off the athlete, right? You were talking about stress earlier, Evan. The idea that stress going into a show can really change the physique. You need to get sleep. You need to make sure that you're not, I work mostly with women, actually all women at this point, just about, but most women, and you guys will nod your head when I say this, are type A. They're planners. They have either built-in anxiety or anxiety around not having a specific plan. Dani is the most planned person I've ever met.
Rachel's a close second.
Is she? Well, it's very fun to go on vacation with you because I don't have to make one decision. They've all been made.
I want to say this.
Follow the dream. Just go where I go.
Yeah, I do want to say this too, Paul. Like you mentioned, something that really made a lot of sense to me, and something I want people to really understand is you say you run mock peaks with your athletes. which means they're in shape way ahead of time.
Yeah, the benefit I like of a
shape,
mock peak,
you're in
the
shape
mock
ahead
peak
of time,
week,
everything's easy.
you get to see how you look filled out. If you've not peaked, and it's, if it's an NPC show and it's their first couple shows, and I know the division, I might not run a peak week if I know this person's going to crush it anyway. But for like a national show or like a pro show, I want them knowing themselves. Okay, because what we can actually do is, do a mock peak week or even use a show as a mock peak week and get feedback from those pictures. And they might say, you know what, a little bit tighter, a little bit fuller. And now we're just, I always tell my athletes, we're just fine tuning the Ferrari. You're already a Ferrari. Now we're just, we're just putting the right gasoline in the engine. We're just making sure that you're the best Ferrari you can be, but you're already there. So yeah, the mock peak week is not a let's get leaner. It's let's put you, the best peak weeks ever. Every peak week that I've had that's been successful, whether it's a pro card, an Olympia, whatever it is, the athlete was cruising into the show.
That's the point I wanted to make with it is you can't peak an athlete unless they're already in shape.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you're doing mock peak weeks 1-2 weeks early. They're ready a week or two early. They're not trying to come in exactly right on that exact day, because then they're the perfect amount of fullness, the perfect amount of leanness. Like that, that's trying to like hit the middle of the dartboard. Like that's incredibly hard to do. But if you're ready early, you feed them into the show, like what you're doing with the peaking. Because on a peak, you're typically going to eat more than a normal week, right? Typically.
Yeah, I'll explain the linear load, but I want to hear what Dani was about to say.
Sorry, Dani.
Oh no, you're good. Well, Paul asked earlier about what some of our experiences were with peaking clients and what kind of horror stories we've had. And for me personally, I feel like just the most common thing I've had is what we've already said, which is they just weren't lean enough when they competed with like a previous coach. Like, so kind of what they did with peak week didn't really matter that much because they weren't lean enough. But the other most common thing is they just followed a meal plan. That's the most common thing that I've had when people come to me, if they've competed before. They're just following a meal plan and they don't even know what macros they were doing. I've definitely heard them talk about how they cut out water. But Paul, I know that you have some pretty interesting stories, like the girl that was told to not leave her room for like 2 days.
Oh yeah.
Lexi's face.
I'm like, wait, what? Not leave her?
No, she was required to lock herself in her hotel room for until the show.
Oh my god, what?
Yeah, I'll tell you her name off the air because she's actually a pro. Well, no, not like that. It was more like she was so depleted and run down that her coach was like, I don't want you going outside because it's going to be bad for you. Like this girl was on the diuretics, just literally could have put herself in harm's way. So she was only allowed to go down to the show for prejudging and came back to her room. And then in a similar situation, she had signed up for a show as a pro and then got to the show and her coach was like, you're not allowed to compete. I'm going to pull your contract because you don't look good.
Oh
yeah. Yeah. So, there's those kind of horror stories. The meal plan is another big one for me, Dani, because girls are given a meal plan and it says, these are your 5 meals. They never actually plug it in to understand the nutrition. And a lot of times what we'll do is, we'll have a 110-pound girl who's on 190 protein, 11 fat. And you're like, why? What is the benefit of 190 grams of protein for you? Right. And it's, it's the cookie cutter approach. It's like, oh, if I give the same plan to every girl, a small percent will be successful. And that's all that I'll talk about.
Another thing like I've heard of, which it's really unfortunate, but I feel like it's more common than it should be, is not necessarily an approach, but I hear a lot of people talk about how their coach either kind of ghosts them on peak week or just show day. And that always baffles me because I mean, peak week and show day, that's when you should have a lot of communication with your coach. And it just baffles me that still happens.
Mm-hmm. I had a client once
I'm over the top with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a client once that was scared to contact me on show day. She's like, but it's a Saturday. It's a day off for you. And I was like, no, it's not. You're competing. It's not a day off. Like, I had to beg her to, like, contact me on show day. And I was calling her. I'm like, what's going on? Why haven't I heard from you?
Yeah.
Because she was so, like, nervous to communicate with me for some reason.
Even, like, European clients, and I'm sure Steven can attest to this because I know he has a lot over there. I mean, even if the show starts early when we're supposed to be asleep over here in the US, like as a coach, like that's our job. Like set an alarm when the client is going to be waking up, going on stage. Like that's our job, I feel like.
Yep. I mean, that's an expectation you have to set with the athlete when they sign up for you. But that's the difference, I think, between someone who is a prep coach and someone who has a client in prep, right? Either personal trainers or coaches online that have a client that decides to compete. They might not be thinking like, oh, yeah, my client's competing on Saturday, whereas all of us are either at a show, or if we're not at a show, you're damn sure I'm getting up early on Saturday to answer phone calls and check-ins and do what I got to do.
Yeah, there was one time when I competed, you were in Hawaii,
Yeah, I
and the
know.
time difference, it was like 2 in the morning. And I was actually a little worried about texting you, but I think you also had like probably 15 people competing that day, but you were up like all night. Your
Yeah, I
Hawaii
mean,
time.
for me, coaching competitors is not like an inconvenience. I'm fucking excited, dude.
Yeah.
Like especially that day. I'll never forget that day because I literally was on the phone with your friend when they started the overall that you were in, and
Well,
the
my
lady's like,
friend is now a coach for the Stephanie.
it was Stephanie, wasn't it? Okay,
Yeah.
so I don't remember that specific part of it, but I just remember I remember Stephanie now saying,
Mhm.
"Okay, coach, they're starting the overall," and the lady goes, "Turn your phone off. We're taking off." And I was like, "Okay." I had to hang up the phone. I didn't know what happened, and it was one of those short flights. We were just going from island to island, so it was like 45 minutes. And literally, as soon as I turned on my phone, I just had Danny won the overall. Danny won the overall. So, but that's what you enjoy as a coach. Like if you're going to coach competitors, you should be slightly excited about it. I mean, most of us compete as well if we coach competitors, so that show day feeling, that excitement. Yeah,
And that's a
yeah,
big reason that I was happy to join it, wanted to join up with you, Paul, and Pro Physique is I love this stuff, man. And everyone here that coaches competitors loves this. So it is
yeah,
not an inconvenience. I find myself more getting frustrated with clients because they don't communicate enough on show day or
sure.
enough the days leading up. Or I'll ask a question, say, hey, send me a picture after your last meal. And they don't because they fell asleep. I'm like, listen, this is not the time to miss details. Like this is when this is incredibly important right here with it. So it's you're never going to be an inconvenience to asking questions or to wanting to know the reason behind something. It's like we do this because we love it. Like that's the reason that we do it.
Well,
So I
there's
know some
definitely
people
times I
do.
feel like I'm more invested in the show than the athlete.
Yeah.
And so you have to temper your expectations of them, and because ultimately they hired us to do a job, and so I always try to, okay, because I've had some clients that are extremely needy, and I've had some clients that just text me once before prejudging and once before finals, and they were thrilled. Thank you for being there, coach. And I've had clients that I talked to 74 times on show day, and they were like, oh, I needed you more. So like, you've got to find the balance for you and for that competitor. And, another great thing is like realizing you don't need to coach everybody. You're not the best coach for every single person. Sometimes there are better coaches for other
Mm-hmm.
athletes. It's got to align with your philosophies, which you believe in. And that's something that I've been very okay with. And it's a very comforting feeling knowing, because your first couple clients that decide to either get a different coach or that they don't think you're the right coach for them, it hurts you. And then after a while, you just go, no, thank goodness. There's been many a time when a client left the next week, I was like, man, I'm in a better mood this week. What's going on? And it was that negativity that I was getting in those emails and those text messages. Well, let's get back to
Yeah,
the focus on peaking. What's that?
I said sometimes people just don't vibe right. Sometimes it's just not the right
Yeah.
fit.
100%. I mean, and that's a big part of coaching. And I think a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
don't understand that, and they get upset, and there's nothing wrong with getting upset, but the way I've always handled a disappointment with a client or someone saying like, they didn't like the work I did, or they thought I wasn't a good coach, is really trying to not be angry at them and then go, okay, why is that their perspective? What could I have done differently? And a lot of it for me has come down to, when we first started coaching, I didn't do a lot of initial consultations. I would do a lot of emailing with them. Hey, what's your goal? Hey, like, a couple of emails back and forth. And now I'm setting up their plans. And now I require a phone call. I'm not coaching you unless we can get on a phone call and have that rapport. Because there's been definitely times when I've been on the phone with people and I've been like, yeah, this isn't going to work out. I'm not
Yeah.
going to say that to them on the phone, but I just know this isn't going to work out. Right.
Mhm.
Um, And so you learn to pick up on some of those red flags from the get-go.
Yes, absolutely. And you get to just learn their personality too. You can always kind of sense a lot by just that initial first phone call and their personality and how passionate they sound. So yeah, I love the phone calls.
Yeah,
That's
it
great.
just
Yeah, it's huge.
it changes the whole coaching situation, because my whole goal with that initial phone call is I'm like, hey, you can text me, you can call me, you can email me at any time. Try to keep the texts for things that are urgent or show day. Email is wide open. Phone calls, I got a schedule for you if you need to make a phone call. But just giving them that idea that you can never, like, the other thing I hate is on, like you said, on show day, hey coach, I don't want to bother you. I'll literally reply, you cannot bother me. This is my job. I love doing this. It would bother me if you didn't message me because you had a question on show day and it went unanswered, and trying to really build that open relationship, especially when, competitors, because a lot of them are empathetic to us. They're like, well, I know you have kids. I know you, yeah, but I've built my life around the idea that this is what I do for a living. Right. So, that making sure that that's clear. And that can also help reduce the stress of the athlete. Ultimately, from day one, if they're comfortable talking to you, that's going to make them a better athlete when they do get on stage. Honestly, like, my athletes become my friends. They're, some of the closest. I mean, shit, Dani I met at Junior Nationals, right? And then she became my client. Now she's one of the directors of coaching for Pro Physique. That's how I met Lexie, was at a show.
Vacation together and well, we should, Paul, let's get into the linear loading and what that is and how it works, because I have a question that I want to ask you about it and the instances of like when you don't use it. So let's talk about what it is.
All right, so I want to talk about the basic approaches to peak week. So we can say what you did, Dani, which was do nothing, which is actually a better approach than what I think most people do, which is manipulate water and sodium, going into the show, pulling out carbs. That approach results in a worse look than you just look on a normal day in the gym, right? So there's the just keep everything the same look. Now the front load was the approach that Lane did with me, where we pretty much kept everything stable, but we loaded carbs on Monday, tapered them down. So it was a really high day Monday. Then it would taper down Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then Friday we would check in and he would say, okay, let's go back to Monday's numbers or go back to Tuesday's, or, he would have some adjustment based on, and inevitably peak week, every show I did, I would start dropping weight. I mean, rapidly. I would drop 3, 4, 5 pounds after that 500 carb day. So by Friday, I would be a lot flatter, and that carb bump that he would give me would never give me the same look that I had like Tuesday or Wednesday, right? And I had this problem with a lot of my bodybuilders. I was coaching a lot of natural bodybuilders at that time, men. So I would always notice, like, man, they look better Tuesday or Wednesday morning than they do on show day. So in one particular athlete that I had just the most impossible time peaking, his name is Ray Clark, natural bodybuilder. He gets on stage around 225 pounds. He won NPC overall bodybuilding shows. He won natural pro world championships, just an immense athlete. And I could never predict how he would look. We would look insane one show and then soft and flat the next. And so I just reached out to Dr. Joe. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Joe's history, he was a WNBF pro bodybuilder, also coached over 500 athletes to pro cards, including IFBB pro cards. He still coaches people. And he's like, well, it's the unpredictable nature of your peak. You're basically filling out the balloon that he called the muscle, and then it's depleting and depleting, and you're trying to recapture that process. But you're not taking into account the fact that your metabolism is now sped up. So that day where you did 500 carbs on Monday, if you do that same 500 carbs on Friday, it's not going to be enough because now your metabolism is faster, right? And I was like, oh, that makes sense. So I was like, well, what's the solution, Joe? And he's like, you have to walk carbs up every day. So you're basically already shredded, and you start walking carbs up every day to accommodate for the fact that your digestion improves, your sleep improves, which has these downstream benefits of your metabolism picking up. Now you're filling out, and most of the time my athletes are maintaining or dropping weight during peak week, which is a great headspace to be if you're an athlete. You're like, I'm eating more, I look harder, the scale is stable and going down. Now, instead of trying to get, like, in some instances, I don't know, 500, 600, 700 carbs on Friday, you might only need 400 because you had 350 the day before and you had 300 the day before that. So your muscles are staying fuller, even though they're not completely filled out where you risk spilling. So it's a much more predictable look. Your digestion is great. You're very full. You honestly, most of my athletes on show day tell me like, I don't even care if I go out to eat. It's just of no interest to me. It's just another normal day for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll have them kind of repeat their Friday macros on show day usually. Depending on how things went on Friday and what time they're getting on stage, we'll have different amounts of meals. But that linear load is a very predictable way to fill out the muscle. Your digestion stays the same. And it just improves a lot of these markers. And it puts them in a position to potentially, if they need to do another show, if they need to, it's hands down changed my career. And I'll say this: I don't do it with every single person the exact same way. That's why I send out the questionnaire. It does require an athlete to be completely shredded and someone that I can kind of taper the cardio down. The cardio goes kind of down throughout the week. Sometimes I'll leave the cardio the same. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is. I do have a video called I think I called it linear loading on YouTube, where I kind of actually put some graphics on there. But it's just changed in my mind. The best way to peak the athlete is now the best way for the athlete to feel good physiologically and psychologically. It all lines up. And, I've used this strategy on multiple national champions, my Olympian. We're probably going to have multiple Olympians this year. So it's just changed the course of my coaching career, all because I sat down with Dr. Joe and I was like, hey, I need help. Like, I'm having this situation, and it just has bled into everything else that I do. So yeah, I'll always be grateful for Dr. Joe for like just explaining that to me, because he I don't know, he doesn't really put out a lot of information. He doesn't really care to, but he's just he's just full of good information. So, and I'm sure we did that with both you, Lexie, and Dani last preps.
Well, I'm gonna have to be humble for a second. So the first show that we did together, I was hesitant to do that. And I mean, another factor played a role. I had started my cycle like a couple days before the show, but we didn't do the linear load with me on the first show that I did not do well at. And then I remember after that show, when it didn't go well, you were like, okay, now let's try things my way. I remember you saying that. And so we did the linear load for the next show the very next week. And that's when I won the overall.
Yeah. I mean,
So.
Yeah, it doesn't guarantee anything, but the way I think of it is, this is a muscle contest, and muscle is 80% water. And if you are not pushing your muscles to be as big and full as possible, you're going to be leaving room on the table for someone else to beat you. A really conditioned athlete who's really full can beat an athlete with more muscle, because you actually, it's impossible to describe it if you haven't been to a bodybuilding show. But when you see an athlete on stage that is shredded and full, you cannot take your eyes off them. Like, you see every muscle fiber in their body moving. They look healthy, as Evan described it earlier. They have a look about them that you're like, what is, like, how does that happen? Like, it's just a different look. And I've had that comment when I've competed. I've won, little braggy moment, but I've won a bodybuilding overall in the NPC, a classic physique overall in the NPC, and a men's physique title in the NPC. And I am not what you would consider a very muscular athlete. I have a decent structure, a decent amount of muscle, but I beat people on conditioning and fullness and coming into the show with a lot of pop. And picking the right shows, because I'm not doing these huge NPC shows, but I've managed to have a lot of wins in my career because I've always showed up right. And I'll always be grateful for Lane for that, because had I found a different coach first, who knows if I would have even ever wanted to compete again. I just don't think the sport would have fit me. But when you do things, it's almost like you're doing things differently than everybody in the sport. I think that's kind of my personality. I like that we were doing things differently. I like that people were like, you can't do a bodybuilding show and eat flexible dieting. And there's all these stigmas around the sport that are, I don't know. I don't know if people know that Daraja's natural and a flexible dieter, and she's, top 6 in the world. I don't know, but people even say that to this day. Oh, you can't go to the Olympia natural or flexible dieting and this and that. So, I think I love breaking through those stereotypes.
And also, what people need to understand is flexible dieting doesn't mean eating Little Debbie's on peak week either.
Exactly.
Like, that's where people get it twisted.
Yeah.
on there a lot of times. And Paul, I think I sent you a podcast the other day. There's another big name coach who's actually doing very similar to the stuff that we do here now. He's out in the UK, but there's other coaches that are starting to go down that same route with the steps and with, instead of cardio, counting your steps and the linear loading and the flexible dieting, and it's interesting to see. And
Let's bring him
eventually,
on as a coach for us.
I don't think that's going to happen, but he's doing pretty well on his own. But
We need a Europe coach.
yes, yes, yes. But no, it's neat to see. It's neat to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'd wonder if he's ever watched any of my content because, well, to be fair, the walking thing, when I switched all my cardio to walking was after 2017. I rewatched the Ronnie Coleman movie, The Unbelievable. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie, Ronnie Coleman, The Unbelievable. I'm sure Evan's seen it,
The
but
Netflix one?
no, it was one of his DVDs. It was when he was still a police officer.
Oh yeah, they have Planet Powerhouse all the time.
Yeah, so I was just rewatching it, and I just thought, okay, this is the greatest physique that's ever hit the stage. Ronnie Coleman, hands down, the most muscle, the leanest, and it was one of his earlier physiques, not towards the end of his career. And that man, all he did was walk. He trained his ass off, and he had a treadmill in his house, and he would do an hour of cardio, go work all day, do an hour of cardio when he came home. And I'm like, and people are complaining about doing cardio, and this guy's 300 pounds, and he's doing 2 hours a day of just walking. So I said, I'm going to try it. Lo and behold, got shredded, won shows, and it's translated to like the way I coach people now, because HIIT cardio was very in vogue when I first started competing, and it worked to a degree. I mean, I definitely got lean, but I just remember how much prep I suffered in those years. The low energy, the low libido, the getting dizzy when I got up, being cold all the time. And when I switched all my cardio to a new form, I just remember thinking like, I don't even feel like I'm in prep. I remember like being like stage lean and thinking like, yeah, I had some low energy moments, but I didn't have this overwhelming feeling of like constantly having the flu almost like I did my first couple preps. And there are some adaptations that you get from HIIT cardio that lower your resting heart rate and all these things. So I think looking at contest prep, the big picture is what's exciting for me. Like you said, counting steps, Evan, because my first prep, I remember the first prep I did with Lane, he was like, okay, you need to do 30 minutes of cardio 5 days a week. I was like, cool. So I just won't play ping pong anymore because I got to do cardio.
Yeah.
Well, I used to play ping pong, and this is going to sound funny, but like I would break sweats. Like me and my friends would play hard. And I all of a sudden just took that activity out of my day and replaced it with 30 minutes of cardio. I could have just kept the damn ping pong, right, and done no cardio. So, if you're not paying attention to your daily activity as an athlete, cardio is not magic. It's just movement. So if you're just replacing another movement that you enjoyed more, and it's the same thing with peaking, if you're shredded, you can pretty much just walk into a show keeping things pretty stable.
Paul, you just struck a memory. On my peak week in 2014 with William, I'm pretty sure I did HIIT at least 5 days in a row on peak week.
Oh wow.
We were doing HIIT every single day on peak week.
Yeah, I would not have anyone ever do HIIT cardio in peak week unless it was a very bad situation and we like spilled. That's one way you could like fix a spill is by profusely sweating and pulling some stuff. But HIIT cardio is very stressful on the body, right?
So CNS big time.
Yeah, so I'm trying to, in peak week, I'm trying to keep cortisol low to really enjoy that food going up. I mean, I remember one prep Lane had me doing 3 HIIT cardio sessions a week at the end of prep. And I was, every day I woke up stressed. I'm like, oh God, I got to do HIIT cardio. Because I had to do HIIT cardio like after legs some days. So like imagine going through leg workout and then thinking, okay, now I have a whole nother workout to do.
I remember William and Lauren, and I can't remember if you were there or if Lane was there, but you guys they did a YouTube video on HIIT one time. And
that was my video. I did it with Lane and William and Lauren, and we went up to the gym and I did it. Yeah, it was, back when I was
doing like
YouTube.
Sled pushes?
Yep.
Did you do some sled pushes? Yeah.
Sled pushes.
I remember
we went to the gym. We did sprints.
Yeah.
We talked about how breathing, like what HIIT cardio should look like. Because a lot of people were doing like, they were like doing intervals and calling it a HIIT.
They're doing intervals and calling it HIIT. It's not.
Yeah. And so we wanted to show, that was when a lot of the research was being done on HIIT cardio with the bikes at the University of South Florida, University of Tampa. A lot of that stuff was happening around here, and I was privy to it because of Lane.
So something funny is that video, at that time I was a personal trainer in a gym in Kansas, and that video inspired me to create a HIIT class at the gym.
Cool.
And so once a week I would do a 30-minute HIIT class, and I would have people come in and we would do sled pushes and battle ropes and sprints outside. And then what are they called? Like dead runs on the treadmill when treadmill's turned off and you like
dead mills. Those are brutal. Yeah.
Those were awful.
Those are brutal. Actually, yeah, when I first started training in high school, I got into like boot camps. So that's what I used to do. A lot of that, like the HIIT training. So it was kind of a learning curve, like going into bodybuilding, realizing that it's really about working smarter, and that doesn't always equate to working harder and doing the HIIT. And I think like stress is another variable that is so important during peak week. And it's not really anything like as a coach we can tell our clients to like not stress as much as they can, but it's something like as a client we have to take the initiative too to really not put a lot on our plate peak week. And another little note I will make too, Paul, you probably remember this. Last year when I flew to the Oklahoma show, and this is just like standard if you're flying to a show, I highly recommend flying in like a day early, because last year I flew in like the night or the day before, and it was just a lot of stress on my body, and just stress with getting on the flights, making sure they got there in time. And I felt like I looked okay, but definitely, I feel like that stress, it doesn't work favorably for the body. So I would always recommend flying in a day early if you do travel for a show.
You can always you're always going to risk holding a little bit of water when you fly too. So it always makes sense to get
Absolutely.
there a day early. Always.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you're competing on a Saturday, go Thursday night. Don't go Friday, because you're not accounting for the fact that if you're flying somewhere, probably got to go to the store. You got to get the check-ins. You got to get to your training appointment. You got to check into your hotel or your Airbnb. God forbid there's a flight delay and you have a connection. Now you might miss it. Now you're stressing that you might miss the flight. So all these variables.
You might need to go buy a microwave.
Buy a microwave, buy a fridge. I've seen some people do that.
I've done that.
I almost have.
So stress is just, especially for somebody who's extremely lean. And especially I know you said you can't tell people to do that to de-stress, Lexie, but I actually will talk to my clients about, okay, what's your plan? Like, what time are you going to bed? Because sleep is huge. That's probably one of the other big variables that I really pay attention to. If someone's not making progress, and I'll say, well, what's your sleep like? Oh, you know what? I've only gotten 5 hours of sleep the last 4 nights. Well, okay. So tomorrow we're going to take day off from the gym, no cardio, and I want you to sleep 8 hours. Lo and behold, they drop 2 pounds, right? So it's like this accumulation of stress and fatigue, and that you don't even realize, because we're all busy people, especially competitors. I think competitors are people that typically put more on their plate than anybody else. I don't want to say the word overachiever, but I will say we are just very full in our lives. Parents, business owners, a lot of, the one thing I remember about my first couple of years doing natural bodybuilding is I would be like, everybody seemed to have a master's degree, and they played guitar, they played, they are all these very high achieving people that also did bodybuilding. And it made me realize bodybuilding doesn't take up that much time. You're going to eat anyway, just eat some good shit. You're going to go to the gym anyway, just have a plan and focus on it. So bodybuilding, it can be integrated into your life. There's some periods at the end of prep where you're working on your posing and you're a little bit fatigued, but for the most part, bodybuilding year round is not that time consuming. You can consistently crush your workouts and hit your meals and still be very, very productive with your everyday life.
To me, it makes you more productive because you have to wake up every day with a plan, and you have to have a plan.
I was just going to say that I find that bodybuilding makes me better in other areas of my life. It just makes me more structured and more productive in other areas as well.
Yeah. It taught me
every decision you make.
I always say that it helped prepare me for motherhood.
Dani, didn't you say that before you and Kyle got married, you weren't as organized? Was that a bodybuilding thing or a Kyle thing?
Both. I used to be, oh my gosh, so type B, so free-spirited, spontaneous in the moment. Gosh, I'm a totally different person now, but for the better. He makes me a better person, as your spouse should. But it started with just like I was the baby of, like, my parents kind of babied me, but more in the sense of like they just didn't really take the time to teach me how to do shit. And
Right.
so I kind of went off into the world and like had no idea what the hell I was doing with my life. And I met him and he just kind of helped me like go, hey, like you're graduating college soon. Like, what are you gonna do with your life? And I got into training. He taught me how to count macros, taught me how to lift weights. I started loving it. Well, I started seeing results really quickly, love the process, and then decided to do a show a few months later. And so it was a combination of both him and bodybuilding that helped me just like
Yeah.
get my shit together, honestly.
Yeah.
Become
I
an
say it all the
adult.
time. That's why I love our transformation challenge, because if you have a physique goal and a deadline, which bodybuilding is, but not everyone wants to get on a bodybuilding stage, but if you have those two things, you have to be organized. You have to know where your meals are coming from. You have to know what time you're going to the gym. Life's going to happen. You're still going to have work, family, friends, happen. You got to be able to go, okay, I'm going to get my shit done anyway, because we've all got the same 24 hours and the same excuses, right? I mean, I don't know many people that are independently wealthy and they're just like, well, what am I going to do today? No, we've all got these same issues, and that's what's great about the sport of bodybuilding is that you get this group of people with very like-minded like skill sets and stuff. So, yeah.
Paul, what real quickly before we kind of end things, what I want to know, in what instances do you not use a linear load? Like, what do you do when someone isn't as lean as you want them to be?
Yeah, if they're not as lean as I want them to be, then we're just going to really use peak week to probably push for more conditioning. I'll still try to give them a recovery day the day before the show, but if I think they're close, within like really close on the conditioning, I'll be doing double cardio and low carbs Wednesday, Thursday if I need to. I really feel like the body can, in 24 hours, drastically change. So yeah, I had I had one of my girls that turned pro at North Americans. She was doing double cardio up until one day out because she was so close. I was like, we've got to just get that tie in just a little bit tighter. And she was on low carbs for so long. She was under 100 grams of carbs for a few months. And I noticed even on the days when we gave her refeeds, the scale weight would bump up, and she didn't necessarily look better. She looked softer for a couple days, but they were keeping her going, right? They were keeping her muscle. So I knew it wasn't like I was going to be able to load her carbs into the show. So I think if I looked it up, I bet she probably was at 100 carbs a day before the show and turned pro. She's very densely muscled. So for someone that's got a lot of muscle, you might not need to fill them out as aggressively, right? She just, for her, conditioning was paramount. So it is, every situation is different. Remember, the judge doesn't care how much you ate. They don't know. They're just looking at the body. They're not like, how much cardio did you do yesterday? How much food did you eat? How long have you been training? How stressed are you? They don't care. So you just need to put them in the position to walk out under those lights and look the best they can look and let the judges sort it out. So the linear load by far is my favorite thing, but it's just like we talked about with contest prep. When you're in contest prep, you make yourself more organized. When I know that I want to linear load my client, I know they have to be ready early. I can't be like, well, you didn't drop weight this week, but let's see what happens. No, I'm like, hey, let's stay on top of this. And every time I tell a client, hey, I'm going to push you harder because I want you to be ready before the show, they all go, cool. I'm
Yeah,
dead.
why not?
Yeah, no one ever says like, no, let's just try to time it just right and I'll just barely skate into the show. Everyone loves to be ready and see themselves look a certain way and then be like excited about getting on stage versus waking up on show day like, oh dear Father in heaven, please let me look good when these lights turn on in the morning. So I guess we're good on the peaking stuff, huh?
I think so. I think this is a good, to the point episode. I like it.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice if we could do this with like a PowerPoint and I could show some stuff.
Yeah.
But we've kind of officially announced it. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but February of next year, we're doing a contest prep seminar for women. So we're going to focus on the women's divisions. It's going to be here in Tampa at our gym in Tampa. Right now we've got Brett Contreras coming, Laura Lee Chapato's coming, Daraja will be there, obviously, myself, a bunch of our coaches, a bunch of you guys. Hopefully you guys can all come. But, we're going to be selling spots for that pretty soon. I'm also going to get a very well-known IFBB pro judge. Don't want to say any names yet. But that'll be in February before the year kicks off, before the Arnold even happens.
I'm excited for that.
So I think if you go to prophysique.com and click on events, it'll be there. You can
Very cool.
Yes.
pre-register. We're not selling any spots yet, but we are doing pre-registration, and we're going to offer a discounted spot for people that pre-register.
Very cool.
So, all right.
I think one big takeaway from this, guys, is like it's be ready early if possible, and then you don't have to do a bunch of drastic stuff. And
Yep.
if you think peak week is this magical week where everything changes, it is not that. It's about taking you from a 99% to 100. That's the goal.
And if you're listening to this and you're in peak week, or you got a peak week coming up and your coach is doing all these things and you're uncertain about it, that's a tough spot to be in. I would bring it up to the coach. Make sure you're getting the answers that you want. Their job, it's not just to give you a plan, it's to make you understand the plan. So
Ask why.
Ask why. Why are we taking diuretics? Why are we pulling water? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, but you need to understand it and be comfortable with it. It is your body. Make the right decision for you.
But don't wait until peak week to ask those questions. Ask them when you're thinking about signing up with them. How do they typically approach peak week?
I will literally send new clients a peak week from another client and go, here's an example of peak week from a girl that just did something good, right? Just won the overall this show. And I'll take the name off and all that. And I'll just say, you can't apply this to you because it doesn't apply to you. But then they'll go, oh, I'll go, yeah. When do you take the diuretic? You don't, right? So so the proof is in the pudding, right? If we weren't getting the results, who cares how healthy or how right we do things? It's not a ethical decision. Bodybuilding judges aren't judging people based on who had the healthiest prep. So if we weren't having people having a lot of success on stage, all of these points would be moot. But between flexible dieting, peaking properly, taking the time to get on stage, using proper protocols, competing can be sustainable. Yes, it's tough, but it doesn't have to be detrimental to your health and detrimental to your happiness. Whereas some girls do one show, have a terrible experience, and then they're like, oh, bodybuilding's stupid because they had a terrible approach, right? It can be sustainable. You can go in and out of prep without having an eating disorder, without, putting on body fat that's unwanted. That's what I believe.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Something that happened to me once that can be a bit contradicting and confusing is I did once have a judge tell me that I needed to come in more dry. I needed to get drier.
So when you ask somebody what that means, that's really what's important. So, and to be fair, even the Olympia judges, when they say something to me about an athlete at nationals at the pro level, and they say something, I say, do you mean you want them fuller as in filled out more, or fuller as in they need more muscle, right? So I'll try to quantify. When you're talking to a judge, someone says you need to be drier, you'd be like, so you think I'm too hydrated, or do you want to see my skin tighter, right? Because that's what they're talking about. When you walk on stage with body fat, it jiggles.
Right.
They don't want it to jiggle. They want it to fold.
That song. That's all I thought of.
That's why
that was his point.
But that's what looks watery on stage is body fat. Body fat looks watery. Muscle does not look watery. Muscle can have all the water in it at once. It will look hard. Body fat jiggles on stage. So, yeah. What did Arnold say? You can't flex fat.
I think one good thing we talked about one time too is the difference between being flat and being full, because I think that's a big misconception people get, and some things to look at to be able to know if you are flat or are full. That's a thing that a lot of coaches can't look at and not know either, because you can't really just look at it and tell. You have to know the other factors that play into that.
Well, and that's another good thing about doing higher carb days throughout prep, having refeed days and doing diet breaks, is that you get to actually see the athlete filled out a little bit with muscle. But athletes know when they're full. They might not know the terminology, but they'll be like, man, in the gym today, I looked crazy.
If you can explain it to them and give them ways to look at it, then they'll be able to tell you. But most people, you say you're flat or full, they say, I don't know.
Sometimes you got to teach them. Paul, I know you don't work with near as many first time competitors. Lexie and I definitely do. I definitely have had a lot of girls
have
on
no
peak week
idea.
where I'm having them like text me their pictures post lift on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I'm like, okay, do you feel like you're fuller today? And they're like, I don't know. Like they literally don't know. And they don't understand why I'm having them take those pictures post lift. And so I actually will put that in my peak week now. Kind of like in more details at the bottom, I'll say the reason we're taking these pictures post lift on these days is because I need to see if you're getting fuller. Are you seeing more lines? Are you seeing more vascularity? Like, are your pumps better? And so sometimes I really do have to coach them and explain to them what to look for, because they're going to be able to see a lot more of that stuff in person than I'm going to see from them just sending me photos.
100%. And I love asking for pictures post workout during peak week as well, because it's exciting for them to see themselves looking like that. So sometimes if athletes are a little more shy, I'll encourage them to be a little bit more narcissistic in peak week. Like, hey, you're never going to look this good again. So let's go in the mirror and take some pictures. Have your husband, have your friend take a picture. And obviously for a first-time competitor, you don't really know the difference. I still remember my first prep really noticing the difference. Now, I had been lifting for 15 years before I ever did a show. So I think a lot of it comes down to you have to have enough muscle to be fuller. Sure. But the difference between me depleted, like a couple weeks out from the show, I'd be like, why am I even doing the show? This is stupid. I look like a beanpole. I would do like a high carb day, and then I'd be like, well, basically I could beat Arnold Schwarzenegger right now. Like, I am the greatest bodybuilder that ever lived. Like, it's literally so psychologically different when you're full and you just got the roundness, and like you just pick up a weight and you just feel like everything tighten. So yeah, that's definitely something you got to learn. But
it's the skinny fat stage. It's the middle portion.
It's the worst. It's literally the worst. All right, guys. Well, I guess we'll have to plan another one around describing fullness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really helpful to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
We'll need lots of pictures.
Could do. Yeah, be good.
It's hard, honestly, to see a picture of someone. It's more of a naked eye thing. Like a little bit in pictures, you can detect it, especially if it's good lighting and the same location and all that. But the one thing I know is, like, if you see a little difference in a picture, it's way different in person, right? Like slight differences in a picture are like much more drastic to the naked eye.
I think it's pictures, it's your scale weight, and it's how they feel. Like those three things all play together. Know if you're flat or full. I think a lot of those factors all matter.
I made a side-by-side once of my last prep. It was my morning photo that I probably sent you, Paul, and put it next to my afternoon photo of me lifting in my garage gym. Put it side by side and sent it to my I have a bikini team chat group on Instagram, and I sent it to them. I'm like, this is flat, this is full. This is what you're looking for when I'm asking you on peak week if you feel like you're getting fuller.
Right.
And that helped.
It's a great idea. Mm-hmm. If only I had pictures of bikini competitors.
I don't know where you would find any.
I don't know. Good. All right. Well, the Pro Physique Code thanks you for your patronage, and we'll be back. Guys, have a good day.
Appreciate it.
Bye, guys.